How's it going, everybody? So recently I got bored and went down a decently sized rabbit hole of what sword is the worst. So of course some of you guys are here to know what the best sword is, and some of you know what the best sword is in Destiny 2. But this data that I collected might shock you about how right you think you are. Now before I get into the details, let me tell you the guidelines I placed for these tests. Every legendary sword had to have Whirlwind Blade. Every sword had to have Jagged Edge, and we looked out for the exotics because they do have Jagged Edge. And every sword was tested on Carl, I believe his name is. Lastly, every sword had to be the same power level bracket of 1570. Couldn't get it to 1580, fellas. Not enough pinnacle drops, I guess. But now that you know all swords are on the same playing field, the only difference is how they shine. Adaptive frames do a burst uppercut, Vortex frames do a spin attack, caster frames throw out a projectile, Lament has Banshee's Wail, and Heartshadow launches 4 projectiles at once, along with a debuff. Now let's get into the test. So I'm basing this test off of what I call a cycle. A full cycle does differ for the exotics, so I'll be descriptive here. For the exotics, a full cycle is to use your heavy swing, then light attacks until the heavy swing is fully charged. For the legendary swords, a full cycle is 10 swings, then a heavy swing. Since this is how you would optimally do the most DPS, this is how we will test them. Now since I made every legendary sword have Whirlwind Blade, I have to take into account that it takes all 10 swings to get it up to its max damage, before a heavy swing of course. And you know how people say, if you don't have Lament, just use Falling Guillotine? Then when you say, is the Eager Edge sword okay? They say, no, that's way worse damage. Those people couldn't be more wrong, because those two don't just compete. They tie all the way down to the last number. Now instead of naming all the numbers out, I'll just place them on screen for you here, with the gameplay in the background. And as you can see, down to the ones place, adaptive frames and vortex frames do the same exact damage for their light attack portion of their cycles. Now the heavy attack is where it differs. Starting with the adaptive frames. It appears that upon heavy swinging an enemy, you will get an initial high damage number being 25,880, followed by 4 additional lower damage numbers being 15,636. Following the math here, the total damage just for the heavy swing with times 10 whirlwind active comes out to being 88,424. Almost 100k in one tack. That's pretty good. And for the vortex frames heavy swing with times 10 whirlwind active, upon spinning there seems to be 6 consistent numbers, all being 16,175. So 16,175 times 6 would be 97,050. Only 3k till 100k, even more goated. Now before I compare the swords, I'd like to go over all of them first. So let's blast through caster frames, only because no one uses them. Here are the swing numbers. And as for the heavy swing with times 10 whirlwind active, the sword launches a projectile that does 10 ticks of damage that are all 6,758. The heavy swing alone sits at an underwhelming 67,580. Now to the exotics. Starting off with what everyone is placing their bets on as the best sword, Lament. Now of course for this exotic, you have to gauge the cycle differently. Heavy swings first, then the light attack until the sword is fully recharged. And for the Lament's heavy / light swings first, it starts off small, doing 3 ticks of damage, one being 21,751, and the other 2 being 5,438. So for the first swing, totaling out to be 32,627. Then for the second to 5th swing, they all ramp up to 29,002 for the first tick of damage, with the addition of 5,438 on the other 2 ticks of damage, totaling each of those swings to be 39,878. Then the heavy swing, doing 3 ticks of damage as usual, one being a massive 83,077 damage, with the other 2 ticks being 18,126, totaling the last heavy swing only at 119,329. And as you can see, that alone kills Carl. But that's unfortunately not where the cycle ends. We still need to get the light attacks accounted for until the sword is recharged. So I went back and got the values for each light attack, being 21,751, then went out into the open and swung until my heavy was recharged, coming out to 10 swings. So 21,751 times 10 would be 217,510. So a full cycle of Lament will be a total of 528,978. Moving on to Heartshadow now, the last one. Hoping you're bearing with me here. For an exotic, this one is depressing. But let's get into it. Starting off with the heavy swing, Heartshadow will launch 4 projectiles, 2 of which I missed, but I will be accounting for them. But before I glaze over this one detail, I will say it now. The sword does do damage on the swing as well as the addition to the projectiles. The sword doing 26,959 damage, with each projectile doing 24,960 damage. So 24,960 times 4 with the addition to 26,959 will get you a total of 130,799 on just the heavy swing. For this test, I will be including the debuff because this is where the sword shines, as I stated earlier. It applies a 15% debuff. All the light swings after do 27,558 damage until the sword is recharged. You as the player can get 6 swings off before the sword is recharged. The 6th swing doing a little less damage at 22,046. Not sure why, but it's consistent, so we'll leave it in. Giving the Heartshadow after one full cycle a total damage of 290,635. Not looking good. On to the graphs now. So as you can see, I accounted for Lucent Blade and a 15% debuff for those that are curious. If you simply want base damage with no buffs and debuffs, just look no further than the red bars. The red bars are what you saw in the testing, of course. I want to briefly show you that Vortex frames and adaptive frames are so neck to neck, it's crazy. And if Bungie sees this video, maybe Heartshadow or caster frames will get buffed in the future, who knows. Now I want to add that this test is not over yet. What you're seeing right now is only the first cycle of damage, and while the exotics will not change at all, the legendary swords will, because of the Whirlwind Blade now being at times 10 starting at the second cycle. Now, starting the second cycle, each legendary will be doing consistent damage. Vortex and adaptive frames doing 25,283 damage each swing, and caster frames doing 22,006 damage each swing. Each sword doing 10 swings before going into the heavy swing, and then the heavy swing being unchanged since the first cycle, since it was already a times 10 whirlwind, adaptives being 88,424, vortexes being 97,050, and casters being 67,580, bringing their grand totals to what you see on screen. Now putting those numbers in a graph form, we shall compare. From a I forgot what the last graph looked like perspective, they seem unchanged. But if you look at the first cycle, you would notice that with buffs and debuffs added, vortexes and adaptives didn't reach the base damage of Lament. Now being on the second cycle, you can see with buffs and debuffs added, they both reached the base damage of Lament. Well done, you two. And as for casters, previously they sucked, period. Now they are tied with Heartshadow in all areas. Now we shall compare the first and second cycles in 2 ways. Comparing them to themselves, then comparing them in a way that looks more like if you were in a boss damage phase. Now both of these graphs do account for the 15% debuff and 35% buff as well, though it's not color coded in that way. And all I can really say is, wow. Lament really kills the game for swords, doesn't it? And poor Heartshadow is so below average, I'm questioning why it's even an exotic. Its debuff is only 15% as well, just the salt to wounds. You can do the same thing with the Void Grenade, or do better with Tractor Cannon or Tether. Of course, going the Tractor Cannon route, you would have the fire team member use it. I thought this info was eye-opening for me, sets everything into perspective really. We all knew Lament was goated, but that goated? That's crazy. Anyways, here's all my plugs, peace.